everyone. We're going to get started a few minutes early. We have a very special meeting today because thanks. We're going to go ahead and get started, so please silence your cell phones. But today we're able, because of your support, the Baton Rouge Press Club, we're able to give a couple of scholarships to journalism students. We need more reporters to fill the ranks of our press corps for our democracy. So we're very happy for your support for the press club, and we're going to be giving $1,000 scholarships to 2 journalism students. And Angela is going to introduce our first scholarship winner.
Our winner from the LSU School of Mass Communication is Avery White, and she is with us here today. Avery is a junior from Lake Jackson, Texas, and she has a history of experience in news editorial journalism dating back to her high school years. She has worked for small newspapers, metro papers, magazines, and as a student at LSU, covered the Louisiana legislature this very summer. In addition to being a talented writer, she is also a very talented photographer. According to one of her references, Avery inhales journalism and has worked at every news outlet within her reach since high school. It is highly unusual to meet a student who begins working in high school at a professional newsroom as a writer and photographer. I know Avery personally, and I know, just as one of her professors says, she is energetic, focused, and eager. So, Avery, thank you and congratulations. So
Our second winner is not here yet, but I'm going to go ahead and introduce her anyway. She'll when she comes in, you can we'll acknowledge her. But another outstanding student, her name is Brianna Leaks. She is from the Southern University Department of Mass Communication, and Brianna is a senior from Alexandria, Louisiana. She has extensive experience in news editorial writing, having written for The Advocate, the Baton Rouge Weekly Press, and the Southern Digest, where she also covered sports. In addition to being a talented writer, she's a talented videographer and has hosted a sports podcast. According to her references, and I quote, Brianna is a self-starter. She always has ideas to offer and is very comfortable going nearly everywhere and talking to anyone, a trait that is not as common as one might think in a mass communication program. She is among the best journalism students I have worked with. Both students plan to pursue careers in news editorial journalism, and when Brianna comes, we'll give her her check and I'll introduce her, and she can all congratulate her. Congratulations again to Avery.
and I just wanted to add that these awards, of course, come from the dollars that the press club makes here from your membership, and from some members who also donate above their membership. So let's give everybody some applause.
Good morning. My name is Brianna Moore, a member of the Press Club, and I will be introducing the speaker today. But before, I want to go over just a few housekeeping rules, making sure that only active members of the press and active members of the Baton Rouge Press Club are able to ask questions once the speaker concludes. So let's please respect that. Alrighty, well, Cleo Fields serves Louisiana's 6th Congressional District in the U.S. House. bringing more than 3 decades of public service focused on education, economic development, and community empowerment. A graduate of Southern University Law Center, Fields made history at 24 as the youngest person elected to the Louisiana State Senate and later became the youngest member of Congress in 1992. Throughout his career, he has worked to expand opportunities for underserved communities, authoring legislation like the Delta Initiatives Act and founding the Louisiana Leadership Institute to help develop future leaders. After a 1995 run for governor, Fields returned to Louisiana to build his law practice before being re-elected to the state Senate, where he served multiple terms and held key leadership roles, including chair of the Louisiana Legislative Caucus and chairman of several major committees. Today, he continues to advocate for policies that impact Louisiana at both the state and the national level. Fields is married with 2 sons and remains active in his community and church. Please help me welcome Congressman Cleo Fields.
Thank you very much, Ms. Moore, for that warm introduction. I really appreciate that. And let me also say to Ms. Avery, it's good to have you here. And I met some of the other journalism students from LSU. Let's give all of our journalism students a big round of applause. I really appreciate it. I was telling them that, I actually finished in journalism. I went to, I got my degree in mass communication, radio and TV from Southern University in 1984. So it's a great place to be. And I'm sure each of you will do well in this profession. And it's good to see Jeannie. We talked about the committee leadership that I've served, chairmanships that I've served in the House of Representatives, in the U.S. The state Senate. But it was under her leadership that when I served as chairman of education and made kindergarten mandatory, it was because of the hard work of my good friend Jeannie. Thank you so very much for standing there with me during those midnight hours fighting for young people in Louisiana.
My honor.
Actually, on last week, I was sitting in financial services, a committee which I serve on, and I was going through my notes trying to get my questions together for the next witness. And then my office texted me and they said a decision is in from the Callais case. And I immediately left the committee meeting and went to my office so I could dissect the opinion of the court. And I sat around this table with all of my lawyers, about 3 of them, and we analyzed the opinion. And I wish I could say to you today that I really do understand, but I really do not. I have, this is not my first rodeo. I've served in Congress before. But I've never served in Congress not one single day of my life. Not one day. Without being challenged in the U.S. Supreme Court. Not 32 years ago, not 1 year ago. Every single time I've been elected to Congress, there's always been a lawsuit pending in the Supreme Court. And I say to people, the issue today is not whether or not Cleo Fields serves another second, not a day, not another second in the U.S. Congress. The issue before us today is whether or not a person who looks like me will have an opportunity to serve in Congress. Louisiana's minority population is over 33%. Second largest minority population in the entire nation. And sometimes I get disappointed, but I feel some sense of encouragement when I think about in 1886, most people don't know it, but Louisiana was the first state to ever elect an African American to Congress. John Lewis Bernard, in 1886, people of New Orleans went to the polls, and 64% of the people who voted that day sent the first African American to Congress. And he went to Congress, and he went there. The reason why most people don't know about it is because he went there to take his rightful seat. And then there was a gentleman from Ohio, and he stood in the well of the Congress. And he said to the Speaker of the House, his name was Mr. Garfield. He became the 20th President of the United States. And he said, Mr. Speaker, I object to the qualifications of the gentleman from Louisiana, and I move that we not seat him. And his reasoning? He said, it is too early for a Negro to be seated in this Congress. Let's save the $5,000. And they sent him back to Louisiana. I'm not unmindful of the fact that in 1896, this Supreme Court that ruled last week, it said to Plessy in the Plessy v. Ferguson case, it said segregation is legal. You can be separate in America. There's nothing wrong with that. And so they ruled in Plessy v. Ferguson that separate but equal is okay. And then Charles Nash was elected to Congress in 1874. Charles Nash was elected in the 44th Congress, and he was the first Black American ever elected from Louisiana and actually served in Congress. And then, right after that, he served one term, they took him out, and then Louisiana went 115 years without a single African American serving in Congress. And thus, William Jefferson was elected. And then I was elected 2 years later, and I was taken out. And I sat on the sidelines for 28 years, and I came back. The real question today for the court is, do we disenfranchise voters? This election had already started. People who wanted to be elected had already qualified. Some were unopposed. I was unopposed in my primary. So in a real sense, I'm already the nominee for the Democratic Party. And the Supreme Court ruled that that map that you created, that this legislature created, and this governor signed, was illegal. But the Supreme Court did not say, throw away those ballots. And that's my fight today. And that's why I'm moving around the state, starting in Shreveport tonight, then Alexandria, Lafayette, and then Baton Rouge on Thursday. Because we shouldn't throw anybody's ballots out. And that's my challenge. I joined the lawsuit last night because people's votes matter. People have died. I served with John Lewis. John Lewis fought, and he walked across the Pettus Bridge, not for himself, but for others. You know, and for us to just think it's okay, it's not okay. When the President of the United States of America, his first executive order, I'm gonna do away with diversity, equity, and inclusion. Who does that? And then challenge corporations. If you got any, and universities and hospitals, if you got anything in your portfolio that says diversity, equity, and inclusion, we will take away your federal funds. We're better than that as a country. There's nothing wrong with being diverse. There's nothing wrong with equity and inclusion. When our military became diverse and we included women and African Americans, it didn't become worse, it became better. And thus we have the most fierce fighting machine in the world. Our president picks up the phone and calls Texas. I need 5 more Republican seats. Mid-decade redistricting. And what do? They call a session to redistrict the condos. We are much better than that. And I just wanted to come by today and let you know that we are so much better than that. And I'm gonna open up the floor for questions. And that's all I had to say, but I'll take questions from any member of the press. And I know you have another press conference, and I'm gonna be very quick. Questions? Yes, sir.
Hi, Andrew Greenstein, Louisiana Radio Network. I know that the lawsuit was filed, I believe, Thursday, and on Friday that a three-judge panel had agreed to, to consider the case. I had understood that I heard in the news conference at the Democratic Party headquarters that they were expecting a ruling on Friday. I believe the ruling is still pending. Do you happen to know, have you been given any word as to when a ruling may come down and what the end result may be? Because I know that in early voting, even though the governor has put the U.S. House elections on hold, those races are still on the ballots, on the machines.
We don't have a ruling, and since I stood up here, we may have one any second, but from the three-judge panel as of yet. And I join in on that lawsuit because I want people's votes to count. Under the Supreme Court rules, 44.1, Supreme Court rules, they provide the parties 25 days to request a rehearing. So I really think Louisiana put the cart before the horse. Louisiana just, within 24 hours, suspended the elections. I'm telling people who are voting to vote and vote the full ballot. You know, people who have absentee ballots, vote the full ballot. Don't listen to the Secretary of State or the governor for that matter, because this issue is not resolved yet. And so when the three-judge panel rule, let's assume that they rule in favor. Then the state could take it up to the Supreme Court. You go straight to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court will see this issue again. I would think that their ruling will be, within days, hours, because it's an important issue, and I'm encouraging people to vote, and do not vote the full ballot. Vote the full ballot because the election had already started, and the governor decided, and the Secretary of State decided to suspend it, but I don't think that was in order because the election had started and we didn't have a final judgment from the Supreme Court. The judgment is only final when everybody gets a chance to exercise all of their due process. And there were other due processes in place for parties.
That's 32 days, right? 32 days?
Yeah, it's 25 days as I read it from the time of the issuing of the opinion. The opinion was issued last week. So the deadline would be 2 days after the first primary. And certainly days after people have started already voting. Yes, ma'am.
Regarding inclusion and voters' rights, in 2023, your legislation was Act 203, which created LSU Southern Economic Development Districts with hotel taxes to support economic development. The opposition to your legislation was that it was taxation without representation. Explain your reasoning for not including taxpayers in this legislation.
The law is already set. When you do those economic development districts, you in fact cannot have. I didn't pass that law. I just passed the law to create the district. The law was already passed previously that you could not include residents in these types of districts. And thus, I felt that both LSU and Southern needed an economic development district because, the legislature is appropriating less and less and less to these schools, these colleges and universities. And colleges and universities across the country are taking advantage of economic development districts to help support their schools and institutions. So that's why I introduced the bill, and the legislature passed it. And but it was before, it was before, any, action as it relates to who would vote. That was already established. Yes, I had somebody, yes, ma'am.
The map in question in the Calais case was favored by Republicans. You and the other Democrats favored a different version of the map. Did you have any concerns at the time that this was being kind of teed up as a Section 2 challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I always had, questions. I mean, and that's why we made the record so clear. I wanted the, author of the bill, you know, if he couldn't adopt the map that we had, we wanted to know for what reason would we go forward with the map that he had. And he made the record very clear. He said, I want to protect three people. I want to protect the Speaker of the House. I want to protect the Majority Leader. And I want to protect the only female member of Congress from Louisiana. And that's what the legislature did. You know, many members of the legislature didn't like that plan, self-included. That was a plan, in my view, that looked better on paper. But the will of the legislature was to pass that plan for that reason. And what I did was I made certain that the legislature complied with every court ruling up to that point. So they had to give me a reason why this plan versus the other plan. And it was purely politics. And the court had already opined that you could take political considerations into account. And those were the political considerations that this legislature used. So yeah, I mean, we complied with every ruling of the court. The court had decided to change the tax to intent versus effect. That's unfortunate. But yes, I was cognizant of that and we did. Yes, sir.
So Alabama and Tennessee are set to seek new congressional districts in special legislative sessions this week. What kind of precedent is Louisiana setting?
I think Louisiana setting a bad precedent in terms of putting the cart before the horse. I mean, every vote, you know, matters. And we shouldn't, you know, not count every single vote. And the process was very clear. Before we started this race, we passed an act to have something called closed primaries. And when we passed closed primary, I knew then we had to educate a lot of voters as to how closed primary actually worked. And we commenced to doing that. And candidates actually qualified under the closed primary provision. And after that primary period closed, the Secretary of State sent out 100,000 ballots, as she should have, to voters not only in America, but voters outside of America in our armed services, fighting for our freedoms. Cast their votes and sent them back to the Secretary of State's office. And then as soon as this opinion came down, they said, those votes don't matter. Look, if you tell me I got to jump a certain, I can do that. I think that's fair. You tell me I got to run a certain speed, you give me enough time, tell me what the rules are, I could probably do that. But if you tell me, you know, I have to be white to serve in the U.S. Congress, there's nothing I can do about that. I need help from my government. And that's why we have the Voting Rights Act. There's no question Louisiana's population is very large. And we have the evidence to prove that at least in the past, Louisiana just have never elected an African American in a majority white district. Not only Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, they've just never done it. And that's why we needed the Voting Rights Act. Yeah. Next question. Yes, sir.
Do you feel like the governor kind of threw you under the bus?
No, he didn't throw me under the bus. He doesn't have the ability to throw me under the bus. I mean, this is about, and I understand your question. I'm not making fun of it, but I tell people, we need not personalize this. This is about a whole state. You know, I feel that the governor and the secretary of state basically said to people across the state, both black and white, your vote doesn't matter because it won't count. That's wrong. That is just wrong. We have had this fight before. Bush v. Gore. You know, every single vote must count. And I think that people are so caught up into what the president says until, you know, he says, I need 20 more seats. You know, let's do it. We got a rule and let's go. But at the end of the day, the Supreme Court did not say halt the election. Nor should it. And we're going to let the Supreme Court make a decision fairly soon about whether or not Louisiana can do what it did. That's why I'm urging voters to actually go out and cast their votes for the whole ticket. And I'm not on the ballot, for example, right now. But I want them to vote for the whole ticket because that decision is not final yet. One more question and we'll go to.
Just to follow up, if the Supreme Court rules that it was illegal to suspend it, what happens? Do we have a hurry up type?
Very good question. I mean, I would hope that they rule in that way and the elections continue. I mean, there are some thoughts about other people having other challenges. I think we've made a big mess in Louisiana. I mean, a big old mess, but it wasn't necessary. The Purcell case was very clear. We've seen this before, you know, during redistricting time, when a map has been declared unconstitutional. You know, in the past they've said, okay, if you are too close to an election to change the map now, change it for the next term, because we don't want a whole bunch of voter confusion. This governor and secretary of state just decided to just do it. You know, we're gonna suspend the election, and then they use a statute that deals with natural disasters. You know, I would hope that the court sees through it, and I would hope that the elections are back on, and people, you know, we got several days left in early voting, and election day is not here until, you know, later in the month, and everybody get a chance to have their voice heard. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you so much. So the Republican-controlled legislature is getting ready to draw some new maps and move a number of bills through with new maps. And I'm wondering if you talked to Governor Landry about the maps, and if he's told you that Baton Rouge will continue to have a majority black district.
I'm not concerned about a single majority black district. I'm concerned about two. Let me tell you why. I'm concerned about two now because they jumped the gun. You know, Supreme Court decisions are final once you follow the rules. If they had just followed the rules and just held back until that 25 days for members who were parties to the lawsuit could file for, you know, a rehearing, I would be fine. I wouldn't be fine because it's a terrible decision. I'm not ever going to be fine with that. But I think, you know, if I was in a legislature, I wouldn't vote for anything that wouldn't include two majority black districts. Out of defiance to this governor and this secretary of state. What is the rush? What harm is it to let people's voices be heard right now? And so, no, I have not spoken to the governor about how a future district looks. Nor do I have any plans to speak to the governor about how any future district looks. I'm insisting on these elections going forward right now, right here today. Yes, sir.
Why do you feel black voter turnout was an abysmal 24% in the last gubernatorial election, especially since there was a prominent black candidate on the ballot?
Well, I mean, that question has come up before, you know. I mean, Reverend Jackson, we were campaigning in Michigan. We were registering people to vote, and some people were, you know, not excited about being registered because they said, my conditions won't change. And when we got back on the bus, I said to Reverend, I said, Reverend, you know, these people here are just so apathetic about voting. And he corrected me that moment. He said, there are no apathetic voters. They're only uninspired. And it's our job to inspire them. I mean, we got to do a better job at inspiring people to go out and vote. Black and white. You know, people need to vote. People need to go to the polls in record numbers. And people are voting right now. And I want to encourage people to go and vote. And vote the entire ticket. Don't listen to the governor, don't listen to the Secretary of State about not voting the entire ticket, that election is suspended. It's suspended for now. But it is not, it doesn't mean that it will be suspended tomorrow. There are other recourses that can be taken, and we're taking those recourses now. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
All right.
Journalism student.
Thank you so much, Mr. Fields. I was just wondering if you think that the legislature is going to push for another 5-to-1 map, or if Landry may push to have a 6 Republican district map.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I really don't know what the governor will do. And I certainly do not want to second guess the legislature. But I just don't know. I mean, the legislature can do whatever it chooses to do. I think the wisest thing for the legislature to do is to do nothing until we get a final decision from the court. And then once we get a final decision, if that final decision be it good or bad, then the legislature can move into session and then draw maps. And when they draw maps, when they redraw maps, they need to give people an opportunity to be heard. They need to do it like we've always done. Go around the state and hold hearings and let people's voices be heard. And then come to a conclusion as to how the maps should look. And not just rush to judgment. You know, I'm in a very partisan place right now. That place down there in Washington is pretty partisan. You know, and it's a very narrow margin. And that's why, you know, I tell people, let's not throw away our democracy trying to be in the majority, just fighting for a majority. And but that's what I would urge the legislature to do. Absolutely nothing until we get a final decision from the court. Yes, sir.
Congressman, what is your understanding as to how this affects the U.S. Senate race here?
I mean, you can't, I mean, that was a little bizarre. We're going to hold up on the congressional races, and we're going to go forward with the other federal race, the U.S. Senate race. That is total voter confusion. You know, and I don't know if it's purposely done or not, but it's total voter confusion. If there ever was a case for voter confusion, it's this case. And we have rules in place to, you know, to not be in this kind of position. You know, we got a for sale case, we got other cases that have been heard so that we knew how to address this time, this issue. But I just think it brings about a whole bunch of voter confusion to have federal elections, some state and some going forward. And hopefully the court, you know, the 3-judge panel will make a decision sooner than later so we can get an ultimate decision from the Supreme Court. Mr. Jackson, and then we go to this table here. Yes, sir. And tell me when I'm out of my time, please. Yes, sir.
If the legislature does not take part, is it too late for an opportunity for the commission to try to do something about this so that the legislature wouldn't decide? Is it too late for?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk about commissions doing redistricting. But listen, I've been in the legislature for a minute, and you know, the legislatures can do redistricting, and they can comply with principles. They can do that. I mean, right now I'm in the people's house. This is the people's house. We have to see you every 2 years. We have to come to you and request your vote. And the legislature is the state people's house. And they have to come every 4 years. And I trust my legislators. Let them do their job. You know, that's why we elect them. And that's why you elect me. That's why you elect members of Congress to represent you in a larger scale from a legislative perspective. Yes, sir.
David Jacobs with Law Politics. So in your view, following this decision, to what extent does the Voting Rights Act still matter, particularly in states like Louisiana, where race and partisanship are so closely correlated?
I mean, the Supreme Court really gutted the Voting Rights Act. Back in the day when I was a member of the state senate and we did redistricting, 30 some years ago, we had a section of the Voting Rights Act that was Section 5. And there were like 8 states under Section 5. Those were states that had a history of discriminating against blacks. Those were states that, made blacks basically, you have to take a literacy test to even register. Registrars would say, well, tell me how many jelly beans in a jelly bean jar? How many bubbles are in a bar of soap? I mean, it was no restriction. And that's why the President, Lyndon Johnson, and the Congress at that time passed the Voting Rights Act because they said, although we've given blacks the right to vote through a constitutional amendment, the 15th Amendment, states are still resisting, like Louisiana, like Mississippi, and Alabama. And so they passed it, and we relied on Section 5. And then Shelby v. Holder, in 2013, they said, well, we got to get better data. So Congress needs to act on that. And then the other day, they took away Section 2. We moved from Section 5 to Section 2 because of vote dilution. So right now, we really don't have a Voting Rights Act that matters. It's gutted. It is totally gutted. And I tell people, today is Congress. Tomorrow be state legislature. And then city council. And then school board. And as a nation, I just think we're much better than that. Inclusion is good. I'll take a few more questions from. Yes, sir.
Cleo, we hear over and over about radical justices legislating from the bench. At that podium a few weeks ago, we had 2 judges, a district and a appeals court judge say the law, the law, the law, and they were running for the state Supreme Court. And I think the district court said sometimes I don't like the law, but I apply it, and you have to go back to the legislature to change it. Hasn't the U.S. Supreme Court in the past said this is the law and go back to the Congress to pass it? And wouldn't that make this pretty a radical right-wing legislative action of the Congress, of the Supreme Court?
Well, I do think that the next Congress will look at whether or not Supreme Court justices will be term limited. I think that discussion is being had now. I do think that the next Congress, if they pass a Voting Rights Act, it will be clear and explicit so that the leave very little up for interpretation by judges. We have 3 branches of government, and we all know it. The legislative branch, we make the law. That's what we do. We make the law. The executive branches, they just carry out what we make. And then when there's a conflict, the judicial branch is to interpret it. And I think at least the judicial branch feel like we've left too much for interpretation on the Voting Rights Act. And I think that future Congresses will pass a Voting Rights Act and leave very little for interpretation. And that's where I really think we're going, and we'll see how that works out. Who I haven't called on? Yes, ma'am. Did I call on you? Yes, ma'am.
Oh, if there were to be a push for a 6-0 map, are you aware of whether Mike Johnson or Steve Scalise would be okay with their districts being altered?
Look, her question is, if there's a 6-0 map, do I think Speaker Johnson or Majority Leader Scalise would be okay with that? I don't know. Look, let's face the facts here. You know, blacks in Louisiana is a sizable amount of the population here. And no matter how you cut the pie, you know, blacks will have influence in elections in Louisiana. You know, blacks vote in this state. And we have to have 6 congresspersons at least for the next census. And so I don't know. I don't know how the speaker feels about that. I don't know how the majority leader feels about that. I don't even know how the legislature feels about that. You know, but those populations will go into some district. And those voices will be heard on some level. I'll take a few more questions. Yes, ma'am.
Just to clarify, SCOTUS strikes down the map.
Yes, ma'am.
Now the lawsuits are filed. Can you clarify for me one more time, what is the time period? It's a 2-part question. What is the time period for them to respond to the lawsuits? And if they respond and say we agree with you, what would that picture look like for the election?
Yeah, very good question. There are time delays in terms of when you could file for a hearing. We've talked about that. The district court really doesn't have a real time delay in terms of when they have to rule on a case. However, election cases, particularly this election case, will take precedence over any and everything else on the docket. Because, you know, our quest is count the votes. And so the votes are being cast right now. And people are, you know, exercising their right to vote today, as they did before Saturday. So we are, you know, asserting with the court that we want every vote to count. Under the previous map, because the election had already started. And so the court will ultimately make the determination as to whether or not we are right, or, you know, we're wrong. And that decision is going to be made, in my view, probably by the highest court of the land, the Supreme Court. This 3-judge panel, that ruling, as I appreciate it, can go straight to the Supreme Court. And even if we prevail, I guess I'm sure the state will appeal it. If we don't prevail, we will appeal it. So ultimately, the Supreme Court, I would think, will see this again, and I hope they see it sooner than later. So voters in Louisiana would have some certainty as to what's taking place in their state right now today. All right, did I call on you? Yes, sir.
As bad as this is already, is there a concern that you could actually see other neighboring states trying to do the same thing as we're seeing now?
Yeah, there are states who are calling that, you know, Alabama just called this up in the session today. They had a bill filed before today that once they got the Callais case, that they would automatically come into session. So they started their session today. Tennessee just started a redistricting session. You know, as a nation, we're just better than that. It's not the way the founding fathers of this country. That's not what they envisioned. They envisioned redistricting for population purposes. I mean, not census for population purposes. And then you have to do your redistricting based on that. They never envisioned decade redistricting. Look, I pray for our country. We're going to get through it. We got through Plessy versus Ferguson. We got through a lot of other things. We're going to get through this one. You know, we just have to be patient. And the good people in America, you know, need to stand up. And I say it all the time. There are a lot of good people in this country. Very good people in this state. You know? But what you say privately, we now need to say it publicly. It's wrong. And there's just no right in it. And people all over the nation need to speak to that issue. We're better than that we're better than this as a country. And listen, I want to thank you all very much for being here today. I hope I didn't overstate my time. Did I overstay my time?
You're right on time.
I'm right on time. Thank y'all very much.
Okay, thank you so much. And